Transphobia is currently rife, both online and in real life. While it largely affects trans people, and perhaps trans women especially, anti-trans activists are coming for cis women too. Suzanne Seddon is an author and producer who tweeted this. This is Daniel Radcliffe's Harry Potter girlfriend. Now what do you see? That tweet has had over 6.3 million views. Of course, it's going up all of the time. Why? Because of the pretty clear implication that Daniel Radcliffe's girlfriend of nearly 11 years, Erin Darke, is a trans woman. Probably also relevant is that Daniel Radcliffe himself has been a vocal supporter of trans rights. Here's one exchange between Seddon and someone in her replies. You don't have to be a wizard to figure that one out. That ain't no woman, that's a man, baby. Quality. Laughing. Now, Darke isn't a trans woman. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, the couple announced they're expecting their first child. And Seddon's tweet isn't by any means the first of its kind. Transphobes regularly hound cis women who aren't, by their standards, sufficiently feminine, going on to suggest that they're trans. And this clearly shows something about transphobia and gender-critical ideology. Of course, transphobes hate trans women, but they hate cis women who don't conform to their ideal of femininity too. Policing and enforcing an arbitrary boundary of womanhood based on appearance or any other property as transphobes do will inevitably mean excluding the very people they claim to be standing up for. Barnaby, feminists who claim to want to protect the interests of cis women are now openly mocking how those women look. Make sense of this to me.
Well, I think there's a slight red herring in media focus in Britain on what gets called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, because there are many more trans exclusionary people, TEPs, than there are TERFs. So we know that a lot of funding for anti-trans campaigns, which have really reached a kind of fever pitch in the United States, where I'm speaking to you from, it's become a kind of central moral panic, so that even when Donald Trump first ran for the presidency, he had very little to say about attacking trans people, and now it's one of his leading themes. It's become a kind of central war on what they call woke, which is a war on all sorts of groups of people who can be easily harassed. More than half of transgender and non-binary kids have considered suicide, according to a big 2021 survey. The war on those people, pushing those people towards thinking of suicide, is funded heavily by a lot of religious right-wing organizations in the United States. And so the radical feminists become a kind of convenient foil. People who have all kinds of long-standing anxieties about gender become a useful foil for a right-wing attempt, which is important to acknowledge, because the right-wing attempt is not about abolishing gender, which some TERFs might think they're about, but is in fact about reinstantiating gender binaries, is about an anxiety, a kind of panic about the breakdown of those gendered binaries. And this is a very old story. You know, more than 100 years ago, the reason that Rosa Luxemburg elicited so much terror in the eyes of the European ruling classes was that she was a revolutionary who was a Jew, a communist, and a woman. And so there was so much terrified proto-fascist propaganda when she was murdered about the horrors of women joining the labor movement, joining socialist and communist politics, leaving the home and insisting that it was their right to change the world. The breaking down of gender roles has long been a terrifying spectre in the image of conservative thinking. The patriarch in the home is the elementary image of power and authority from which so much else in our society derives. And so the breakdown of gendered authority has always terrified conservatives. And trans politics represents a kind of a frightening thing now, because it can represent, just as gay politics did in the 1980s, it can represent a challenge to a rigidly organized gender binary. And if you challenge that hierarchy, then you're challenging a basic hierarchy on which so much else in society relies. That's why Kemi Badenoch, as the kind of trailblazer standard bearer for the loony hard right in the Conservative cabinet now, pushes an agenda of trying to change the Equality Act to ensure that she can remove trans people from access to single-sex spaces, which would mean that people who had surgery decades ago, perhaps, people who have lived entirely as the gender that they identify as, would now be forced to occupy, women would now be forced into male bathrooms where they can be harassed by men and told that they're actually the real villains, as they're forced into those male bathrooms because though they've identified as a woman for 30 years, Kemi Badenoch decides she can win some Tory votes, policing a gender binary by attacking those people while kids are pushed towards suicide. That's why the Equality and Human Rights Commission stuffed with Tory appointees, because the Conservative Party has treated non-governmental bodies close to government, like the BBC and the EHRC, as its playthings to ensure it furthers its agenda. That's why the EHRC can lend Kemi Badenoch support on potentially narrowing the rights of trans people and changing the Equality Act, and say it seems like roughly a good idea. What we have is a few feminists lending media cover to an overwhelmingly right-wing campaign to police a hierarchy in our society, which is what the right is always about, and further remove rights from kids who are sitting at home right now worrying about whether they can survive, who have much higher rates of homelessness and of suicide because they're targeted, persecuted, and attacked, including by the state and the media.